What happens when the person with the power to search you, to question you, to humiliate you in front of hundreds of strangers picks the wrong person on the wrong day? This isn't just a story about a bad day at the airport. It's a story about a decorated professional, a black woman named Dr. Talia Hayes, who was publicly accused of being a criminal by a TSA agent drunk on her own authority. But the agent Brenda Walsh made one catastrophic mistake. She didn't realize the woman she was trying to break was the very person who was about to become her boss. This is the story of how a moment of prejudice ignited a revolution in airline security, and how karma arrived not with a whisper, but with a thunderous crash. The Air and John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 had a texture. It was a cocktail of floor-polished jet fuel Cinnabon and the faint electric hum of 1,000 anxieties. Dr. Talia Hayes breathed it in a familiar scent that signaled the beginning of another journey. At 6:15 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday in October, the terminal was already a roiling sea of humanity. Business travelers in tailored suits tapped impatiently at their phones, while families wrestled with strollers and oversized neck pillows. Talia was the picture of calm in the chaos. Dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer, tailored trousers, and practical yet elegant Rothy's flats, she exuded an aura of quiet competence. Her luggage, a sleek, graphite-colored Rimowa carry-on, glided silently beside her. Her natural hair was styled in intricate, professionally done cornrows that cascaded just past her shoulders, a crown she wore with pride. She was 42 years old, held a PhD in systems engineering from MIT, and had spent the last decade designing threat detection protocols for the National Counterterrorism Center. Today, she was flying to a final round interview in Dallas for a position that could redefine her career and potentially the very nature of air travel. She was a civilian, but her work was at the heart of national security. The TSA pre-check line, usually her swift passage through this necessary purgatory, was inexplicably snaked back, its flow constricted. A sign announced a random security enhancement funneling half the pre-check passengers into the regular screening line. Talia sighed internally, a minor inconvenience, nothing more. She joined the much longer queue, pulling out her Kindle to read a white paper on behavioral analytics. That's when she first noticed Agent Brenda Walsh. Brenda stood at the head of the line, where passengers placed their belongings onto the conveyor belt. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a hardened face and eyes that seemed to scan for infractions rather than people. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe tight bun, and her uniform, though clean, seemed strained at the seams. She wielded her authority not like a tool, but like a weapon. Shoes off, laptops out, no liquids, over 3.4 ounces, people. This isn't amateur hour, she barked, her voice cutting through the terminal's hum. Talia watched as Brenda berated a young tourist couple who didn't understand her rapid-fire instructions, rolling her eyes with theatrical disdain. She saw her snap at an elderly man who was moving too slowly, grabbing his bin and shoving it forward with unnecessary force. Brenda wasn't just doing her job, she was performing a pantomime of power, and the stage was her security lane. Talia felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. It was the precursor to the kind of encounter she'd spent her life navigating with grace and caution. When it was her turn, Talia offered a polite, professional smile. "Good morning," she said, placing her carry-on and a separate bin with her laptop and blazer onto the belt. Brenda's eyes did a swift, dismissive sweep over Talia, lingering for a moment on her designer luggage and then on her hair. A flicker of something disdain, suspicion, resentment crossed her face. She ignored the greeting. "That bag needs to go in flat," Brenda commanded, pointing at the Rimowa. "And take off that jacket. It's a blazer and it's already in the bin," Talia replied calmly, gesturing to the navy blue fabric next to her laptop. Brenda squinted. "Whatever. The bag, flat." Talia adjusted the suitcase. As it slid toward the X-ray tunnel, Brenda held up a hand, stopping the conveyor belt. She looked at Talia, then at her colleague, a younger man named Miller, whose face was a mask of weary indifference. "We've got a random secondary screening," Brenda announced, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. She pointed a thick finger at Talia. "You, step aside." Talia's calm began to fray at the edges. A random check immediately after another random diversion. The odds were statistically improbable. She saw the glances from other passengers, the mix of pity and suspicion that always accompanied these public selections. She stepped into the glass-walled screening area, her posture ramrod straight. Agent Miller approached to perform the pat-down, his movements hesitant. He was professional, mumbling the required script about the procedure. It was uncomfortable and invasive, but standard. Talia complied without complaint. But Brenda wasn't finished. She was now on the other side of the X-ray machine, staring intently at the monitor. She called over the lane supervisor, a portly man named Thompson, and pointed at the screen. "Looks like a false bottom," Brenda said, her voice laced with triumphant suspicion. "And anomalies in the lining. I'm telling you, Dave, this is a classic concealment profile." Supervisor Thompson peered at the screen, then at Talia through the glass. He gave a non-committal grunt. "Pull it for a bag check." This was the moment the situation turned from inconvenient to humiliating. Brenda strode over to the inspection table, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. She unzipped Talia's suitcase with a rough tug. She didn't just search, she pillaged. Her professionally folded clothes were unceremoniously dumped onto the cold, stainless steel table. She held up a silk blouse, inspecting its seams as if it could contain a hidden microfilm. She opened Talia's toiletry bag, unscrewing the cap on her face moisturizer and sniffing it with a wrinkled nose. "What is this?" Brenda demanded, holding up a small sealed pouch. "That's my sleep mask and earplugs," Talia said, her voice now cold as steel. Her Kindle containing her research lay face down on a pile of her underwear. The public degradation was the point she knew. It was a power play designed to shrink her, to make her feel small and exposed. Brenda ignored her. She began rapping her knuckles along the bottom of the empty suitcase. "There it is," she muttered, a grim smile on her face. "Definitely a false bottom. Classic smuggling technique. What are you hiding, ma'am?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "Smuggling," Talia's voice was dangerously quiet. "I can assure you, I am not." "That's what they all say," Brenda sneered. She took out a small, sharp tool like a box cutter and looked at Talia. "I'm going to have to cut the lining." A gasp escaped Talia's lips. "You will do no such thing. That is a $2,000 suitcase. There is no false bottom. It's a feature of the compression system. If you would simply look at the manufacturer's design—" "Oh, the manufacturer's design," Brenda mocked, putting air quotes around the words. "A likely story. You people are always so creative with your excuses." You people. There it was. The three words that stripped away all pretense of procedure and exposed the raw, ugly prejudice at the core of the encounter. The knot in Talia's stomach turned to ice. She looked past Brenda to Supervisor Thompson, who was now looking deeply uncomfortable, and to the growing audience of passengers gawking at the scene. "I am asking you to stop," Talia said, her voice resonating with an authority Brenda could never comprehend. "You are making a serious mistake. Get your supervisor, and let's discuss the proper procedure for suspected baggage tampering, because this is not it." Brenda's face flushed with anger. Being challenged so directly, so articulately, was not part of her script. "I know the procedure, and right now you are interfering with a federal security screening. You can either cooperate or we can do this in a private room with law enforcement." It was a threat, plain and simple. Talia held her gaze, her mind trained to analyze complex systems and identify breaking points was working furiously. She could escalate demand, a lawyer refused to move. But that would mean a missed flight, a missed interview, and a major incident on her record, however baseless. They would win by attrition. Or she could endure document and act later. "Fine," Talia said, her voice tight with controlled rage. "Do what you feel you must, but I want your name and your badge number, and your supervisor's name as well." Brenda's smug smile returned. She had won. She pointed to her name tag. "Brenda Walsh, badge number 4. He's Supervisor Thompson. Now let's see what you're hiding." With a flourish, Brenda took her tool and with a sickening tearing sound, sliced through the beautiful fabric lining of Talia's suitcase. She pulled it back to reveal the molded plastic of the suitcase shell. Nothing more. No hidden compartment. No secret stash of drugs or cash. Nothing. The silence that followed was more damning than any shout. Brenda stared at the damage she had wrought, her face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. She poked at the plastic, as if the contraband might magically appear. Supervisor Thompson rushed over, his face pale. "Brenda, what did you do?" "The scanner. It showed an anomaly," she stammered, her bravado evaporating. "The scanner shows anomalies on these compression systems all the time, if they're not calibrated right for the density setting," Thompson hissed. "We went over this in the last briefing." Brenda looked from the ruined suitcase to Talia's face. Talia's expression was unreadable. It was a mask of cold, hard fury, forged in the fire of this public humiliation. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. Thompson turned to Talia, his voice apologetic. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. Agent Walsh was mistaken. We will of course file a report, and the TSA will reimburse you for the damage to your property." Talia slowly, deliberately began to repack her belongings, folding her clothes with meticulous care, ignoring the torn lining of her expensive suitcase. She placed each item back, reclaiming her dignity piece by piece. When she was done, she closed the lid, the sound echoing in the now quiet space. She looked directly at Brenda Walsh, whose face had crumpled into a mask of defensive resentment. "A mistake," Talia repeated, her voice low and clear. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it felt a lot like prejudice, incompetence, and a gross abuse of power." She then turned to Thompson. "File the report. I will be following up. You can be sure of that." Without another word, she zipped her desecrated suitcase, slid her laptop into its sleeve, and walked away, leaving Brenda Walsh standing amidst the wreckage of her authority, a shred of torn suitcase lining lying at her feet like a fallen flag. As Talia walked toward her gate, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, clarifying rage. It wasn't just about a ruined suitcase or a missed flight. She would have to run to make it. It was about the system itself, a system that could empower a woman like Brenda Walsh to wield her personal biases as a weapon under the guise of security. A system that allowed dignity to be stripped away based on the color of one's skin or the style of one's hair. She reached her gate, breathless, just as they called her boarding group. She found her seat, sank into it, and closed her eyes. The interview in Dallas was no longer just a career opportunity. It had become a mission. The position she was interviewing for was the newly created post of Director of Security Transformation for the entire Transportation Security Administration. And Dr. Talia Hayes had just been given a very personal, very powerful reason to get the job. The system hadn't just inconvenienced her. It had shown her exactly where the rot was. And she was the one who knew how to cut it out. The flight to Dallas was 5 hours of suspended reality. For Talia, the roar of the jet engines was a low hum beneath the screaming of her thoughts. The humiliation at the security checkpoint replayed in her mind not as a loop, but as a multi-angle analysis. She deconstructed every word, every gesture, every flicker of expression on Brenda Walsh's face. She saw the initial dismissal, the sizing up of her appearance, the predatory gleam of suspicion when her luggage was deemed too expensive, her hair too complex. It wasn't just a personal attack, it was a systemic failure, a flaw in the code she had spent her career trying to perfect. The rage that had been a cold, hard diamond in her chest began to melt, reforging itself into something far more potent resolve. She took out a sleek, leather-bound notebook and a pen from her briefcase. The white paper on behavioral analytics she had been reading earlier now seemed quaint theoretical. She was living the case study. She began to write. She didn't write a complaint letter. She didn't draft a lawsuit. She designed a new system. Her pen flew across the page, sketching out flowcharts, bullet points, and strategic pillars. Pillar 1. Algorithmic bias audits. Mandate a complete independent audit of the random selection algorithms used in TSA screening software. Identify and eliminate biases related to race, perceived nationality, and even accessories like head wraps or specific hairstyles. If the code was targeting people who looked like her, she would find it and rip it out. Pillar 2. The Dignity Protocol. A new mandatory training module for all 60,000 TSA agents. This wasn't the sterile check-the-box sensitivity training of corporate HR. This was a program built on immersive scenario-based learning. It would use VR simulations to put agents in the shoes of the traveler, the non-native English speaker, the person with a medical device, the parent with a crying child, the black woman being profiled. They wouldn't just be told not to discriminate. They would be forced to feel what it was like to be on the receiving end. The protocol would emphasize de-escalation over confrontation, communication over command. Pillar 3. Consequence and accountability overhaul. A transparent, fast-tracked system for passenger complaints that was linked directly to agent performance reviews and promotions. An agent, like Brenda Walsh, shouldn't be able to destroy property and humiliate a passenger with no immediate consequence beyond a supervisor's apology. There would be a 3-strike system for substantiated complaints of bias leading to mandatory retraining, suspension, and ultimately termination. Supervisors like Thompson, who stood by and allowed it to happen, would be held equally accountable for failure to intervene. Pillar 4. Smart technology integration. Champion next-generation screening technology like advanced CT scanners that could identify liquids and electronics without them being removed from a bag to reduce the number of manual subjective bag checks. Fewer manual checks meant fewer opportunities for personal bias to infect the process. By the time the plane began its descent into Dallas-Fort Worth, Talia had a 5-page handwritten blueprint for the future of the TSA. The anger had been channeled into architecture. The pain had become a plan. She wasn't just going to an interview anymore. She was presenting a manifesto. Her interview was with a three-person panel: a stern-faced deputy administrator from the Department of Homeland Security, a pragmatic aviation industry liaison, and a seasoned HR executive. They asked her standard questions about her background, her management style, her vision for security innovation. Talia answered them all, with her characteristic poise and expertise. But then the deputy administrator, a man named Marcus Thorne, leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Dr. Hayes, this is a new role, a transformation role. It's not just about managing the status quo. It's about changing the culture of an entrenched 60,000-person organization. That's like turning an aircraft carrier with a canoe paddle. Why do you believe you can do it?" Talia took a slow breath. This was her moment. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice even, but carrying a new weight. "You're right. It is a monumental task. And until this morning, my answer would have been based on my credentials, my experience at the NCTC, and my systems-based approach to problem-solving. And all of that is still true." She paused, letting the silence hang in the room. "However, at 6:15 a.m. this morning at JFK, I was given a very practical, very personal demonstration of why this role is not just important, but vital. I was subjected to a screening process that was compromised by profound personal bias that escalated from a random check to a public accusation of smuggling and culminated in a federal agent destroying my personal property out of what I can only describe as spite, all while my fellow citizens were forced to watch." The panel was silent, stunned. "I didn't file an official complaint at the time," Talia continued, "because I realized that complaining about one broken component misses the point. The entire machine is flawed. It's a system that, in the name of security, can strip a citizen of their dignity. It's a culture that allows an agent's personal resentment to become a federal matter. The issue isn't just one bad agent, it's the environment that creates and protects that agent." She slid her notebook across the polished table. "This isn't just a job for me anymore. It's a mission. What you have in front of you are my initial thoughts, a four-pillar strategy to begin the process of turning that aircraft carrier. We will audit the algorithms for bias. We will implement a dignity protocol. We will overhaul the accountability process so that consequences are swift and meaningful. And we will accelerate the adoption of technology that minimizes the human error factor that is so often a cover for prejudice." She looked each of them in the eye. "You asked me why I believe I can do it. I can do it because I have to, because I know what it feels like when the system fails. And I have the expertise and now the absolute unshakable will to fix it." The room was electric. She hadn't just answered the question. She had redefined the position itself. She had taken their abstract challenge and given it a face, a voice, and a searingly personal mandate. 2 weeks later, back in her quiet Washington, D.C. apartment, the official call came. She had the job. Meanwhile, at JFK, life for Brenda Walsh had returned to its normal bitter rhythm. She'd had to fill out an incident report about the damaged Rimowa bag, a process that annoyed her immensely. In her version of events, she was the hero. She'd followed her training and her gut, identifying a highly suspicious and non-cooperative passenger with a sophisticated, custom-modified suitcase designed for concealment. The fact that nothing was found was, in her telling, irrelevant. The passenger's confrontational attitude was proof enough of her guilt. The damage to the bag was a necessary step in a thorough security sweep. Supervisor Thompson, unwilling to get into a drawn-out conflict, had signed off on the report with a weary sigh, adding a mild note about refamiliarizing with new scanner density protocols. Brenda saw it as a victory. She'd put another arrogant, wealthy traveler in her place. She complained about it for days to Agent Miller and anyone else who would listen. "You should have seen her," Brenda would say in the break room, stirring her watery coffee. "That expensive suit, the fancy bag, waltzes in like she owns the place. These people think the rules don't apply to them. Well, I taught her a lesson." Agent Miller would just nod, looking down at his shoes. He knew what he saw. He saw a professional woman systematically humiliated. He saw Brenda's undisguised contempt. He saw an abuse of power. But he was new low on the totem pole, and Brenda had been there for 15 years. Complaining would get him nowhere but on her bad side, and that was a dangerous place to be. So he stayed quiet, and the guilt ate at him. 1 month after the incident, a memo circulated to all TSA personnel nationwide. It was printed on official DHS letterhead. Subject announcement of new Director of Security Transformation. The Transportation Security Administration is pleased to announce the appointment of Dr. Talia Hayes to the newly created position of Director of Security Transformation effective immediately. Dr. Hayes brings over a decade of experience from the National Counterterrorism Center and holds a PhD in Systems Engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She will oversee a top-to-bottom review of all screening protocols, training programs, and technology integration with the goal of building a more secure, efficient, and respected security infrastructure. Dr. Hayes will be personally visiting hubs across the country to observe operations firsthand over the coming weeks. Please extend her your full cooperation. The memo included a professional headshot. In it, Dr. Talia Hayes looked directly at the camera, her expression calm, intelligent, and resolute. At JFK, Brenda Walsh glanced at the memo tacked to the break room bulletin board. She saw the picture of the black woman with the professional hairstyle and the fancy title. "Another pencil pusher from DC," she grumbled to Miller. "Never spent a day on the front lines. What does she know about our jobs?" She didn't recognize the face. In her mind, the woman she had accosted was just a nameless, faceless smuggler who got away. An anecdote, a conquest. She had absolutely no idea that the woman in the photograph was coming for her. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. Dr. Talia Hayes was coming to fix the system, and Brenda Walsh was no longer just an agent. She was symptom number one. Dr. Talia Hayes' first 2 weeks as Director of Security Transformation were a whirlwind of high-level briefings, budget meetings, and stakeholder introductions in Washington, D.C. She met with congressional liaisons, union representatives, and technology vendors. She absorbed data, read internal reports, and listened to a dozen different versions of why the agency was the way it was. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had an excuse. Talia listened patiently, her face a mask of professional curiosity, but her mind was a crucible, burning away the jargon and the bureaucracy to get to the core truths. She knew that to understand a system, you couldn't just read its schematics, you had to watch it in motion. You had to put your hands on the gears. On a cold Thursday morning in late November, she decided it was time. She eschewed the formal pre-announced site visit protocol. There would be no motorcade, no sanitized tour route where everything was polished and everyone was on their best behavior. She wanted to see the real thing. "Robert, in," she said to the JFK airport director, a harried but competent man named Robert DeLuca over a secure video call. "I'm coming to your airport today. unannounced. I don't want a welcome wagon. I want you, your head of security, and a single aide to meet me at the Terminal 4 departures curb at 10:00 a.m. sharp. We're going for a walk. DeLuca, who had been expecting a formal visit sometime next quarter, was flustered. Of course, Director Hayes, but is there a specific issue? We can prepare a briefing. The issue, Robert, is reality. Talia cut in her tone, leaving no room for argument. And the only way to observe reality is to not give it time to put on makeup. I want to see your checkpoints on a normal Thursday, 10:00 a.m. The line went dead. In his office at JFK, Robert DeLuca stared at his phone, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. An unannounced visit from a brand-new MIT-educated director of transformation from D.C. could only mean one thing: heads were going to roll. At exactly 10:00 a.m., a black government sedan pulled up to the Terminal 4 curb. Talia stepped out, dressed not in the power suit of a D.C. executive, but in simple black trousers, a gray cashmere sweater, and the same practical flats she'd worn on that fateful day. She looked more like a traveling professor than a high-ranking official. DeLuca and his team, waiting anxiously, almost missed her. "Mr. DeLuca," she said, extending a hand, "thank you for your punctuality. This is my aide Ben. No need for introductions all around. Let's walk." Without another word, she swept into the terminal, her stride purposeful. DeLuca and his entourage scrambled to keep up. She didn't head for the airline check-in counters or the VIP lounges. She made a beeline for the main security checkpoint, the very one where her ordeal had taken place. The scene was a familiar brand of organized chaos. The lines were long, the bins clattered, and the air was thick with the low-grade stress of travel. Talia didn't speak. She just watched, her eyes trained to see patterns in complex data, now scanned for patterns in human behavior. She saw an agent patiently explaining the liquids rule to a flustered tourist. She saw another agent sharing a laugh with a passenger. And then, at lane 5, she saw Brenda Walsh. Brenda was in her element. She was holding court, her voice a sharp, grating instrument of authority. She was admonishing a young man for leaving his belt, on her tone dripping with condescension. "Sir, did you think the big metal buckle was just going to magically disappear? Come on now, use your head." Talia stopped walking. She stood about 30 feet away, partially obscured by a support column, and just observed. DeLuca, noticing her focus, sidled up. "Is there a problem with that agent, Director?" "I don't know yet," Talia said softly. "Let's watch." They watched for 5 minutes. In that time, Brenda Walsh snapped at 3 different passengers, sighed dramatically at a woman struggling to fold a stroller, and yanked a bin away from an elderly man with such force that his newspaper fell to the floor. She seemed to reserve her most venomous attitude for women of color, her interactions with them clipped, suspicious, and dismissive. Talia saw Agent Miller working at the end of the same lane, his face etched with a familiar discomfort. He would occasionally catch a passenger's eye and give a small, apologetic shrug, a silent accomplice to Brenda's daily reign of terror. Talia's expression remained neutral, but DeLuca could feel the temperature drop. "Robert," Talia said, her voice quiet and dangerously calm. "I want to go through that specific lane. Just me. You and your team stay here. Don't intervene unless I give you a clear signal." DeLuca's eyes widened. "Director, that's not necessary. If you have a concern, I can pull her off the line right now. We can—" "That would be treating the symptom, Robert, not the disease," she said, her gaze fixed on Brenda. "I need to see the full diagnostic. Please, stay here." She handed her purse and phone to her aide Ben and walked toward the end of the line for lane 5, queuing up like any other passenger. She was unrecognizable from the woman in the DC headshot. Her hair was styled differently today, in a simple but elegant twist, and her understated attire blended in. She was anonymous. When she reached the front, she placed her empty bin on the conveyor belt. Brenda Walsh, busy barking at someone else, didn't even look at her. "Next!" she yelled. Talia stepped forward. She looked directly at Brenda, waiting. Brenda finally turned her attention to Talia, her eyes performing their routine, dismissive scan. There was no flicker of recognition. To Brenda, Talia was just another face in the endless, tedious river of travelers. Another potential infraction. "Bin on the belt, ma'am. Let's go," Brenda said impatiently. Talia didn't move. She just stood there, her calm, steady gaze meeting Brenda's irritated one. The silence stretched for a few seconds. The gears of the conveyor belt seemed to quiet. The passengers behind Talia began to murmur. "Is there a problem?" Brenda snapped, her frustration growing. "Do you not understand English? Put your things in the bin and move." Talia took a small step closer. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it cut through the noise of the terminal with the precision of a scalpel. "Hello, Brenda." Brenda froze. The use of her first name was so unexpected, so jarring, it short-circuited her autopilot rudeness. She squinted at Talia, a confused frown creasing her forehead. The face was vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. A former neighbor. Someone from her kid's school. "Do I know you?" Brenda asked, her tone shifting from aggressive to suspicious. "We met about 6 weeks ago," Talia said, her voice remaining level. "Right here at this checkpoint. You accused me of smuggling. You said I had a classic concealment profile. You took a knife and you cut open the lining of my suitcase." The color drained from Brenda Walsh's face. It was as if a trapdoor had opened beneath her. Her mind scrambled frantically, trying to connect the dots. This calm, authoritative woman in the cashmere sweater, the passenger with the expensive bag and the intricate cornrows, the ruined Rimowa, the official complaint, the memo, the headshot on the bulletin board. Oh, God. Brenda's jaw went slack. Her eyes darted frantically past Talia to the group of suited officials standing by the pillar, Robert DeLuca, the airport director, staring at her with an expression of pure horror. Her knees felt weak. The blood pounded in her ears. "You—" Brenda stammered, her voice a dry rasp. "You're— her, the new director." "I am," Talia confirmed, her expression unyielding. "Dr. Talia Hayes, Director of Security Transformation. And you, Agent Walsh, are exactly why I took this job." From his position at the end of the lane, Agent Miller watched the scene unfold, his heart hammering against his ribs. He recognized Talia instantly. He had thought about her and his own failure to act every single day for the past 6 weeks. The entire checkpoint seemed to have fallen silent. Passengers and agents alike were staring, sensing that this was no ordinary confrontation. This was a reckoning. Brenda Walsh stood paralyzed, trapped in the harsh fluorescent glare of her own creation. The small, petty power she had abused for years had vanished, leaving her utterly exposed. She was no longer a federal agent confronting a suspect. She was an employee who had just been caught by the CEO red-handed in the middle of her worst offense. And the CEO was the very person she had tried to victimize. "Supervisor Thompson," Talia called out, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Please come here." Supervisor Thompson, who had been overseeing a different lane, scurried over, his face ashen. He recognized Talia immediately and looked as if he might faint. Agent Miller, Talia continued. You as well. Miller walked toward them, on legs made of lead. Talia looked at the three of them, the abuser, the enabler, and the silent bystander. Let's all go to Mr. DeLuca's office, shall we? She said, her voice dangerously pleasant. I believe it's time we had a frank discussion about training accountability and the future of this organization. And Brenda, you can bring your union rep. You're going to need him. Robert DeLuca's office felt like a pressurized cabin at 40,000 feet. From the vast, soundproof windows, the runways of JFK were a theater of silent, majestic motion where massive jets took off and landed with a grace that felt like a mockery of the scene inside. Here, the atmosphere was one of silent, suffocating dread. The grace was all gone. This was the moment of the crash. Talia sat behind DeLuca's large mahogany desk. She hadn't asked for it, but when DeLuca had gestured vaguely towards the seating area, she had moved to the seat of command with an unspoken certainty that felt as natural as gravity. It wasn't about usurping his authority, it was about occupying the space the moment required. DeLuca and his ashen-faced head of security stood grimly to one side, like sentinels at an execution. Opposite the desk, Supervisor Thompson and Agent Miller sat stiffly in visitors' chairs, their postures rigid with the anticipation of judgment. Brenda Walsh had been given a chair, slightly apart from the others, a small island of disgraced solitude. Her union representative, a tired-looking man named Frank, with a rumpled suit and the weary eyes of someone who had fought too many losing battles, sat beside her. He whispered legal boilerplate into her ear. Don't volunteer anything. Stick to the report. But his voice lacked conviction. He knew a Category 5 disaster when he saw one, and Dr. Talia Hayes was a force of nature he had no defense against. For what felt like an eternity, Talia said nothing. She opened a simple manila folder she'd brought with her and laid its contents on the polished wood. There was the official incident report. Brenda had filed its sanitized language, a fiction of breathtaking audacity. Next to it lay the carbon copy of the TSA property damage claim for one graphite Rimowa suitcase valued at $2,150. Finally, there was a printout of Brenda's complete TSA personnel file, a thick stack of paper detailing 15 years of service commendations and a troubling pattern of minor passenger complaints that had been consistently dismissed. The silence was a strategic tool, a vacuum that each person in the room filled with their own specific brand of fear. Thompson's mind raced, replaying every moment of the incident, every chance he'd had to intervene and pull Brenda back from the brink. He had seen the fire in her eyes, the ugly contempt she reserved for certain people, but stepping in would have meant paperwork, a confrontation, and upsetting the delicate, unhappy balance of his shift. So he had looked away. That cowardice was now going to cost him everything. Agent Miller stared at his own hands, clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He felt a nauseating mix of terror and, strangely, relief. The secret guilt he had carried for 6 weeks was finally being brought into the light. He had replayed his own silence 1,000 times, his fear, a constant bitter taste in his mouth. He was terrified of the consequences, but a small part of him welcomed the purge. Brenda's fear was different. It was the primal terror of a monarch being deposed. Her entire identity was wrapped up in her uniform, in the small, potent dose of authority it gave her. To be stripped of that was not just to lose a job, it was to cease to exist. Her mind cycled through defiance and denial. This can't be happening. She can't do this. I was doing my job. Finally, Talia looked up. Her movements were deliberate, economical, containing a formidable stillness. Her gaze, clear and analytical, settled on Brenda. Agent Walsh, Talia, began, her voice calm and measured, devoid of triumph or anger. It was the dispassionate voice of a scientist presenting her findings. I've been reading your report on our encounter 6 weeks ago. It's quite a piece of creative writing. Highly suspicious and non-cooperative passenger. Sophisticated, custom-modified suitcase. Passenger's confrontational attitude confirmed suspicions. You paint a very vivid picture. Brenda, spurred by a final desperate surge of defiance, squared her jaw. I reported what I observed. I followed my training based on 15 years of field experience. Did you? Talia countered, her voice dropping a fraction of a degree. She leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between them. Let's talk about your training, shall we? Supervisor Thompson, a question for you. In the mandatory monthly briefing that took place on September 18th, was there not a specific bulletin complete with visual aids regarding the new generation of compression system luggage? Was it not explicitly stated that these bags, including the Rimowa brand, can produce density anomalies on our older X-ray scanners that mimic the appearance of a false bottom? Thompson swallowed hard, the sound loud in the quiet room. He avoided Brenda's venomous glare. Yes, Director, there was such a bulletin. And was it not specified? Talia pressed on, relentless, that the correct protocol for such an anomaly is first a secondary pass on a higher resolution CT scanner, or failing that a simple hand swab for explosives residue before any destructive search is initiated. Is that not the procedure you are sworn to uphold? That is the correct protocol. Thompson mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Talia's focus snapped back to Brenda. So, Agent Walsh, you did not follow your training. You deliberately ignored a direct recent protocol, a protocol designed specifically to prevent this exact kind of misidentification and unnecessary property damage. Instead, you chose to escalate. You chose confrontation. You chose destruction. I'm going to ask you again. Why? Brenda's composure finally cracked. My gut, she blurted out, her voice rising. My experience told me she was hiding something, the way she looked at me, the attitude. It was all there, all the signs. Your gut, Talia repeated. She let the words hang in the air, tasting them with disdain. Let's be perfectly clear, Agent Walsh. Your gut is not part of TSA procedure. Your gut is not a calibrated security instrument. On October 12th, your gut was a toxic cocktail of personal bias, resentment, and prejudice. You saw a black woman with an expensive bag, professional hair, and a confident demeanor, and your gut decided she was a criminal. You didn't like the way she looked. You didn't like the way she carried herself. So, you used your badge and your government-issued box cutter as a cudgel to humiliate her. That's a baseless accusation. Frank, the union rep, finally broke in, his voice, attempting a bluster he didn't feel. You can't prove what was in her head. You can't prove bias. Talia's eyes, which had been cold, now flashed with heat. Can't I? She shot back, a dangerous edge to her voice. Frank, my aide, is currently drafting a subpoena for the security footage from Checkpoint 4 for the entire months of September and October. We are going to run a simple data analysis. We will track every single random secondary screening initiated by Agent Walsh. We will categorize them by the passengers' perceived race, gender, and even their style of dress. We are going to see if your client's gut has a statistically significant preference for targeting people of color. We'll see if her experience somehow overlooks white men in business suits with the same type of luggage. What do you think that data is going to tell us, Frank? The union rep's face fell. The bluff had been called and incinerated. He knew exactly what the data would show. Brenda Walsh wasn't a subtle woman. Her bias was a blunt instrument, and her entire shift knew it. He sank back in his chair, defeated. Talia turned her unsparing attention to Supervisor Thompson, who seemed to physically shrink under her gaze. And you stood there. You watched. You saw one of your agents ignore protocol. You heard her become aggressive, unprofessional, accusatory. You watched her pull out a tool with the clear intent to destroy a passenger's property based on nothing more than a hunch. You did nothing to de-escalate. You did nothing to enforce procedure. You only ambled over after the damage was irrevocably done to offer a hollow apology. Your job title is Supervisor Mr. Thompson. That means you are responsible not just for what your agents do, but for what you allow them to do. You failed, miserably. Thompson wilted completely, a man hollowed out by his own inaction. Finally, Talia's gaze softened almost imperceptibly, but the shift was there as she looked at Agent Miller. Agent Miller, you were there too. Don't think I didn't see you. I saw your face at the end of that conveyor belt. You knew what was happening was wrong. I could see the conflict in your eyes. So tell me, why didn't you say anything? Miller looked up, his expression agonized, tears welling in his eyes. I'm new director, only 9 months on the job. Brenda, she's a fixture. She can make life very difficult. I was afraid, he said, the confession pouring out of him. I was afraid of being ostracized, of being labeled a troublemaker, of having my own career sabotaged before it even began. I know it's no excuse. I should have spoken up. I should have called for Supervisor Thompson myself. I am so sorry. His apology was not for his career, but for his moral failure. It was genuine, raw, and filled with a shame that was more potent than any punishment Talia could deliver. Talia nodded slowly, absorbing his confession. Fear is a powerful motivator, Agent Miller. Perhaps the most powerful there is. But integrity is not about the absence of fear. Integrity is about what you do when you're afraid. Remember that. She closed the folder with a soft, final thud. The time for dissection was over. It was time for consequences. Here is what is going to happen, she announced, her voice now a blade, leaving no doubt that this was not a negotiation. Agent Walsh, you are suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a full investigation by the Office of Professional Responsibility. That investigation will include the data analysis of your screening history and formal interviews with your colleagues. Your security identification display area badge and all other federal credentials are to be surrendered to Mr. DeLuca before you leave this office. Based on the clear evidence of falsification of a federal report, destruction of property, and a profound civil rights violation, my office will be recommending your termination in the strongest possible terms. The TSA has no place for agents who believe their personal prejudices are a substitute for protocol. A choked, guttural sob escaped Brenda's lips. It was the sound of a life imploding. Her career, her identity, her small kingdom of power, all of it had just been publicly and irrevocably dismantled. Supervisor Thompson, Talia continued, you are being demoted from your supervisory role, effective immediately. You will be reassigned to non-screening duties at LaGuardia Airport, where you will have no direct authority over other officers. Furthermore, you will be required to complete and pass the new 6-week dignity protocol and advanced de-escalation training program, which my office will be rolling out next quarter. If you pass, you may reapply for a supervisory position in 1 year's time. If you fail, you will be terminated. We need leaders, not passive observers." Thompson nodded numbly, the sentence lighter than Brenda's, but a career-ending humiliation nonetheless. He would be the cautionary tale whispered about in break rooms. "And, Agent Miller," Talia said, her tone shifting again, becoming constructive. "Your honesty here today has been noted. But honesty after the fact does not excuse inaction in the moment. There must be a consequence. You will also be required to enroll in the new training protocol. However, I am also assigning you to the pilot working group for that very program. You will help us design the scenarios. You will use your painful experience, what you saw, what you felt, precisely why you were afraid to act, to help us build a system that empowers and protects junior officers who uphold the rules even when their seniors are breaking them. I believe you have the potential to be part of the solution. Do not prove me wrong." Miller looked up, stunned, a flicker of hope, warring with his shame. It was a punishment, a lesson, and an opportunity all in one. A path to redemption. The reckoning was complete. It had never been just about revenge on Brenda Walsh. It was about surgically removing a cancer, holding the enabling tissue accountable, and rehabilitating the part of the system that could and must be saved. As two of DeLuca's security officers quietly entered the room to escort a weeping, incoherent Brenda Walsh away, Talia turned to the airport director. "This is just the beginning, Robert. What happened in this room today is the new standard of accountability. The dignity protocol, the algorithmic bias, audits the leadership overhaul. It all starts now, at JFK. You will be the model for the rest of the country. I expect your full and enthusiastic cooperation." DeLuca, looking at the formidable woman who had turned his airport and its culture upside down in a single morning, could only nod. "Yes, Director, absolutely." Walking out of the office, Talia felt a sense of profound, weary satisfaction. This wasn't a victory lap. It was the first heavy step in a marathon. The road ahead would be long and fraught with resistance from 1,000 other Brenda Walshes and complacent Thompsons embedded deep within the system. But as she looked out the terminal window at a plane soaring into the boundless blue sky, she knew she had done more than just get a new job. She had taken the ugliest professional experience of her life and forged it into a sword. And she had just made the first clean cut. The system had tried to break her, but in the end, she was the one who would break the system and build something better, stronger, and more just in its place. Dr. Talia Hayes' confrontation at JFK wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a revolution. The JFK model became the blueprint for nationwide reform. The dignity protocol, built on empathy and de-escalation, slowly began to change the culture from one of suspicion to one of service. It wasn't a perfect fix overnight, but it was a profound shift, started by one woman who refused to let her humiliation be the final word. Brenda Walsh was fired and faced a civil rights lawsuit, a stark warning to any who would abuse their power. This story is a powerful reminder that one person's courage, combined with the right expertise and the will to act, can challenge an entire system. It proves that sometimes the best person to fix a broken machine is the one who has personally felt its gears grind them down. What do you think? Have you ever had an experience where you felt powerless against a system? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and be sure to subscribe for more incredible true-life dramas.